For years, the world watched the Owens live and love on their remote Yorkshire farm, but when their show vanished and the family grew quiet, questions began to rise finally. After 3 years, Raven Owens finally reveals why her mother divorced Clive Owen, what really happened behind those stone walls. And Windswept Hills, why did Amanda and Clive's seemingly perfect union quietly dissolve silence over the valley of the sudden cancellation of our Yorkshire farm? By Channel 5 was nothing short of a shockwave. Viewers who had faithfully followed the Owen family's journey on Ravenseat Farm were left stunned, confused, and with no closure. There was no grand finale, no final episode to tie up loose ends, no heartfelt goodbye to the audience that had become so deeply invested in the lives of Amanda and Clive Owen. The network, typically accustomed to farewells wrapped in fanfare, simply moved forward with a vague promise of future Owen family projects. But there was no explanation, no transparency about what had truly transpired. The cancellation wasn't just the end of a beloved show. It marked the abrupt disappearance of a family that had been so open, so visible, so real to its viewers. For years, the Owens had been a picture of country life, living authentically amidst the rolling hills of North Yorkshire, surrounded by sheepdogs and their large brood of children. The show was more than entertainment. It was an escape to a simpler life. The sudden shift in direction felt like a loss, not just for fans of the show, but for a family that had allowed the world to step into their daily life. But behind the scenes, a deeper story was unraveling, one of personal and emotional upheaval. The Owens, who had once been seen as the epitome of rural happiness, were quietly facing challenges that weren't being broadcasted. Rumors began to circulate, whispers about Amanda and Clive's relationship, once considered the golden couple of the British countryside. Their separation was kept under wraps, a stark contrast to the openness they'd shared on screen. Yet even though the cameras had stopped rolling, the fractures in their personal lives had already begun to show. The idyllic family farm, so vibrant and filled with the laughter of children, now stood in silence, a quiet testament to the complexities hidden beneath the surface. This was no ordinary cancellation. It wasn't just about a television show ending. It was about a shift in the fabric of a family. The world was left to wonder what had really happened behind the scenes of Ravenseat Farm. The public face of the Owens, to the viewers of our Yorkshire farm, Amanda and Clive Owen were more than just TV personalities. They were a symbol of perseverance, authenticity, and the heart of British country. Living for years, they had shared their lives with the world, raising their 9 children in a remote and unforgiving part of the world. They were presented as the perfect rural couple, hardworking, down-to-earth, and dedicated to their children, their farm, and each other. Their daily routine was anything but easy, from shepherding duties to tending to their large flock of sheep, from battling the harsh Yorkshire winters to navigating the logistics of a busy family life. The Owens embodied the resilience and strength of country living. Amanda, with her tall, striking presence, quickly became the face of the show. With her sharp wit, energy, and warmth, she commanded the screen, offering glimpses of a life many could only dream of. Clive, by contrast, was quieter, less the showman, and more the silent partner. While Amanda's charisma captivated viewers, Clive's reserved nature provided a grounding balance to their dynamic. He was a stoic backbone, content to let Amanda take the spotlight, while he tended to more grueling and unseen tasks of farm life. Yet it was this dynamic, this balance, that began to show cracks over time. The constant pressures of maintaining their public image, coupled with the unrelenting demands of family and the farm, were taking their toll. The cameras, which had once seemed to capture the authenticity of their lives, also captured the raw stress of living under a microscope. Their children, while largely kept out of the public eye, were part of a narrative that now felt fragile, an illusion of rural bliss under the constant glare of national attention. But it wasn't just the cameras that were weighing heavily on the family behind the idyllic scenes. Amanda and Clive were grappling with a growing emotional distance. The very pressures that had made them so relatable on television were now causing strain in their marriage. And it was their eldest daughter, Raven, who felt the weight of it most profoundly, as the eldest child, Raven, had always been in the spotlight, whether she liked it or not. But as the family circumstances shifted, so too did her role. She was no longer just a helpful, supportive big sister. She was stepping into the murky waters of adolescence and the emotional complexities of family in transition. And it was Raven, too, who was now at the heart of the mystery. Why had her family, once so open and welcoming, retreated into silence? What had truly happened behind the scenes of our Yorkshire farm? And why did it feel as if the Owen family was being swept away by the very fame they had embraced? It's time to tell everything. And after 3 years, Raven Owens finally reveals why her mother divorced Clive Owen. The quiet observer Raven Owen, at just 12 years old, was thrust into the limelight when our Yorkshire farm began filming. She wasn't just a kid living on a farm. She was part of a family whose every move would be watched by millions, while the crew captured every moment of her parents' seemingly idyllic life on Raven Seat Farm. Raven, the eldest of 9 children, quietly observed from the sidelines. To the public, her family was a picture of rustic bliss, an idealized vision of rural life. But Raven saw beyond the camera lens. She saw her mother Amanda, the charming shepherdess who radiated confidence, struggling to hold everything together behind the scenes. She saw her father Clive, a man whose deep love for his children was undeniable, but whose marriage had begun to crumble under the weight of years of pressure and fatigue. Growing up in front of the cameras, Raven was forced to mature quickly. As the eldest, she naturally took on the role of protector, shielding her siblings from the growing strain of public scrutiny. She poured herself into her studies, choosing to pursue veterinary science, a profession that mirrored her love for animals and the farm. Working late into the night to support herself, Raven became accustomed to a life of sacrifice and quiet endurance. As the gossip, the online rumors, the constant speculation about her family's relationship grew, she shielded her younger siblings from it all. She stayed silent when the headlines hit, until the cameras turned off and the world seemed to forget about them. The silence wasn't out of fear. It wasn't out of a desire to hide the truth. It was because for Raven, the truth was still too painful to share. She wasn't ready. The quiet observer, the one who watched the cracks form between her parents, wasn't ready to speak her truth. Not yet. Once the cameras stopped rolling, life on Raven Seat Farm didn't return to normal. It couldn't. The familiarity of farm routines remained. The early mornings, the harsh winters, the constant care for the livestock. But the family once united under the spotlight was no longer whole. Amanda, after years of enduring the strain of a televised marriage, moved out, leaving Clive behind with the younger children. What had once seemed like a simple separation, an amicable decision to part ways, was much more than that. It was the end of an era, the end of the image that had been carefully crafted for years. At first, their separation seemed practical, almost businesslike. The show had ended, the cameras had stopped filming, and they each retreated into their separate lives. But what was invisible to the cameras, the cracks and facade, had always been there. Now, without the lens to filter their lives, those cracks became more pronounced. The illusion of unbreakable rural harmony began to unravel. The speculation began almost immediately. Online chatter exploded. Was it fame that tore them apart? Did the pressures of their newfound celebrity drive a wedge between them? Was there someone else? Exhaustion? The world was desperate for answers. But Amanda and Clive never responded. They never gave the public the satisfaction of knowing exactly what had gone wrong. For years, Raven remained silent. She watched her parents' divorce unfold from the sidelines, watching as the family dynamic shifted. It wasn't that she didn't know the truth. It was that she wasn't ready to tell it. The pain was still fresh, and the scars of the past were not yet healed. The years between. As the months wore on, Raven's presence on social media remained curated and calculated. Her posts were still filled with flashes of her life, work accomplishments, snippets of her health journey, and achievements she could share without exposing too much. Family portraits appeared occasionally, but only in fragments, never too close. Never too revealing. Amanda Owen, her mother, had stepped into the spotlight, becoming a sought-after speaker and Instagram influencer. Clive, on the other hand, stayed rooted in his new life with Ruben and the spin-off series that kept him busy. Raven, meanwhile, kept mostly to the shadows, allowing her family's journey to unfold in public while she stayed behind the scenes. Despite her relative silence, her followers remained loyal. They watched, waiting for Raven to tell her own story, to break her silence. Some of them had been with her since the early days of our Yorkshire farm, their hearts invested in the family's highs and lows. And though she posts occasionally, an image of a morning walk, a healthy meal, the occasional graduation or work update, there was an unmistakable absence in the spaces between the photos. The public began to wonder what she was really thinking. What was it like behind the screen? What had truly happened to the family she once called home? Raven's carefully crafted posts kept the truth at arm's length, but they could not erase the curious glances of those who had once loved her family. And then one evening, something unexpected happened. A story post appeared, a black background, stark, simple, and bold. White text illuminated the dark space. It's time to tell everything. There were no tags. No hashtags in sight to give clues. Amanda had always been the driving force in the family. On screen, she was the iconic shepherdess, the mother, the leader, the face of their shared success. But behind the scenes, Raven described a woman who felt trapped. She had become the embodiment of public expectations. Always there, always performing, always giving. But in the privacy of their home, Amanda felt as though she had lost herself somewhere along the way. The pressure of being both a mother and a media figure weighed heavily on her. She had spent years holding everything together, but her strength came at a cost. Clive, on the other hand, was rooted in tradition. He had always been a quiet one, the one who preferred the solitude of the farm to the spotlight of the media. He resisted the fame that came with the show, clinging to a simpler life that felt authentic to him. His resistance wasn't about bitterness, but about preserving the life he knew before the cameras rolled. But this difference in temperament became more of a gulf than a balancing force. In the quiet of their home, the tension between them began to build, not through loud arguments, but through withdrawal of warmth. Their relationship, once founded on shared goals and a mutual passion for the farm, slowly eroded in silence. They were two people in a marriage, yes, but also two people with lives that had begun to pull them in different directions. There were no grand confrontations, no dramatic outbursts. It was the absence of connection that hurt the most. They stopped talking as much. They stopped looking at each other the way they used to. There was no one defining moment, no singular event, but rather the slow, unspoken understanding that something had shifted. Raven witnessed it all. She saw her mother become quieter, more distant, lost in thought, heavy with the weight of unspoken words. Amanda, once so vibrant and full of purpose, seemed to fade into the background of her own life. And Clive, though always present, seemed increasingly preoccupied with his own quiet discontent. Raven watched this gradual shift with quiet sorrow, unable to intervene, unsure of how to fix what was broken. When Amanda finally made the decision to leave, it wasn't born out of anger or bitterness. It wasn't about finding someone else or seeking revenge. It was about survival. Amanda needed air. She needed space to breathe again. She had given so much of herself to everyone else for so long that she had lost sight of who she was. She wasn't just Amanda the shepherdess or Amanda the mother. She was Amanda, a woman who had a life, a mind, a spirit that deserved to exist beyond the role she had played for so many years. The decision to leave was not a rejection of Clive. It was a reclaiming of herself. Raven, in her quiet way, understood this more than anyone. She had seen the gradual shift long before it became public. She had seen the exhaustion in her mother's eyes, the silent desperation to rediscover a sense of self. But even though she understood, that didn't mean it was easy. The fractures between her parents were not something that could be repaired overnight, and Raven knew that she couldn't fix them. All she could do was watch, bear witness, and try to understand. In the end, Raven saw her mother not as a TV personality or the figurehead of family empire, but as a woman who had been trying to survive. A woman who, in the quietest ways, had given everything she could until there was nothing left to give. After the divorce, Amanda didn't collapse in the way many expected. There was no public meltdown, no breakdown that played out for cameras. Instead, she quietly picked herself up and began to rebuild. She moved to a new place, found a new sense of independence, and began to reconnect with the world outside the farm. She took to writing and speaking, finding new ways to express herself beyond the role of mom from TV or the shepherdess. But critics were quick to label her. They accused her of chasing fame, of seeking attention, of abandoning the life she had once seemed so devoted to. To them, Amanda's reinvention looked like something less authentic, like a desperate grab for relevance. They didn't see what Raven saw. They didn't see a woman who had spent years sacrificing her own identity for the sake of her family and the image they had created. Raven, however, understood. She didn't always agree with her mother's choices, but she recognized the journey Amanda was on. For the first time, she wasn't seeing Amanda as a perfect mother or the superwoman from TV. She was seeing Amanda as a person, someone who had been lost in the roles others had cast her in. Raven could now see her mother's struggles through a different lens, one of empathy and compassion. Amanda wasn't rebuilding for the sake of fame or recognition. She was rebuilding for herself. She was trying to find joy, peace, and a sense of wholeness that had eluded her for so many years. Raven knew this, even if the world didn't. She had watched her mother quietly navigate the difficult journey of self-discovery, and as she did, Raven couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. It wasn't always pretty, it wasn't always easy, but it was necessary for Amanda and for the woman Raven was growing into. Through it all, Raven knew that the woman behind the camera, her mother, was not just a character to be defined by others. She was a woman in her own right, trying to navigate the same messy, beautiful, and painful journey of life that anyone else did. And for the first time in a long time, Amanda was starting to find her way back to herself. Clive's quiet grief. Clive Owen was never a man of words. He didn't stand before cameras or spill his heart in interviews. In a world obsessed with self-promotion and public narratives, Clive was a quiet figure, withdrawn from the prying eyes of the public. Even as his marriage to Amanda faltered, even as the world speculated about their lives, Clive remained steadfast in his silence. But Raven, in her quiet reflection, offered a glimpse into that silence, a silence that was not born of apathy but of deep, unspoken sorrow. Through her eyes, we saw a man who had been shaped by the weight of unexpressed grief. Clive wasn't indifferent. He wasn't cold or detached. What he carried was a heavy burden of a love lost, an unacknowledged mourning that consumed him quietly, without fanfare. He missed Amanda. He missed the life they had built together on the farm, the shared purpose that had once bound them, but he couldn't find the words to voice it, and he couldn't bring himself to break the silence that had settled between them. Instead, Clive threw himself into his role as a father. His connection with Reuben, his right hand on the farm, grew stronger in the absence of Amanda's presence. Reuben became his anchor, his companion, in the solitude that followed. Together, they continued to work on the farm, keeping the wheels turning. But despite the closeness with Reuben, a chasm remained between Clive and Raven. There was no malice in the air, just an unspoken distance, a quiet gap that no one seemed able to bridge. It wasn't resentment. It was simply space, the space that grief creates, a space that can feel like both an ocean and a desert. Clive, in his grief, had retreated into himself. He couldn't change the past. He couldn't fix what had been broken. And in his silence, there was no accusation, no blame, just the kind of pain that's too raw to speak, too deep to articulate. Raven saw him for who he was in that moment. Not a man avoiding his emotions, but one who had been swallowed by them. What the silence meant. Raven's decision to break her silence came not from a desire to hurt, to expose, or to cause drama. It came from a place of healing, a need to untangle the years of unspoken grief that had been silently wearing her down. Her words weren't a confrontation. They were a release. She wasn't out to capture headlines. What she sought was a kind of catharsis, a way to untangle the memories that had clung to her like cobwebs, the guilt that had followed her for years, the misunderstandings that had lingered in the silence. By sharing her story, Raven did more than just open up about her own pain. She offered clarity to a situation that had been shrouded in quiet confusion for too long. Theirs had been a marriage that didn't burn with fury, but instead slowly eroded in the quiet mist of unmet needs and unspoken regrets. It was a marriage that had faded in fog, not fire. Through Raven's revelation, both Clive and Amanda were finally given the clarity they had been denied in their silence. She didn't just heal herself. She helped them find their own understanding, a path toward healing that had always been just beyond reach. In telling the truth, stripped of the polished versions they had shared for years, Raven brought them something more valuable than forgiveness. She brought them the truth. And in the end, that was what they all needed most. What truth have you been holding on to, quietly, patiently, until the time felt right? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching this video with us, and catch you in the next one.